The question is, does Election Commission of India have authority to stop or delay these budgetary procedures? Budget 2012 also has a lot of significance because its repercussions or its impacts are felt even till today. The then Finance Minister Pranab Mukherjee, later on Pranab Mukherjee also became President of India. In 2012, he presented the budget on March 16, 2012. Hello and welcome to another episode of Political Fault Lines. Since we are in the budget season, in today's episode, we are going to unravel the story of a budget from Indian political history. This is a story of Budget 2012. I'm quite sure by the heading you must have deciphered that Budget 2012 was delayed. We are going to understand why, but that is just one part of the story. We are going to understand how budget is a very complex process, and any government for that matter is always in between a rock and a hard place. It has to take tough decisions. It has to create policies that may have unintended consequences or certain repercussions. We are going to understand what happened in budget 2012 and how even till today we can feel the traces or impact of this budget from 2012-13. Let's begin our discussion. As I told you, the budget 2012 was delayed. It was presented by the then Finance Minister Pranab Mukherjee. Later on Pranab Mukherjee also became President of India. In 2012, he presented the budget on March 16, 2012. Now you know that the date of budget presentation has changed. From 2017, budget is being presented on 1st February. But before 2017, the budget was presented on the last day of February. That means in 2012, it was to be presented on the last day of February, but it was delayed by 16 days and eventually presented on March 16. Now, the question is why? This budget of 2012-13, it embodies a fundamental tension in Indian democracy. It shows us or it highlights the conflict between bureaucratic governance and democratic accountability in our country. It also highlights a constitutional loophole or a lacuna in our legal system. Let's first understand why the budget was delayed. Why on March 16 and why not on February 28th? The budget presentation was proposed to happen on last day of February. But in that year, in 2012, there were elections going on for 5 state assemblies. Election was going on for Uttar Pradesh. Again, Uttar Pradesh, last phase was due on March 8, 2012. Uttarakhand, Punjab, Manipur and Goa. And the model code of conduct was already in operation in these states. And it was till March 9, 2012. But the question is, sir, if a state assembly election is running, can we delay or should there be a delay in the central budget? That was the big question. Does state assembly election call for delayed central budget? And this was the big question in front of everybody. At that time in 2012, the ruling party was UPA, United Progressive Alliance, and the opposition was NDA, BJP-led NDA. Now, when you look at the arguments from the opposition, that is BJP, were that they wanted to delay the budget. They petitioned to the Election Commission of India and also to the then President Pratibha Patilji. The petition was that budget should be delayed after the election date. They suggested that the budget presented before the elections in 5 states, it could be weaponized to sway the voters. They also highlighted that there was model code of conduct, and while that is running, such decisions in the budget, etc., can influence the voter and can influence the election results itself. The argument from the ruling dispensation, that is UPA, was that union budget is a national exercise and delaying or disrupting the budget dates, because that was already delayed. You do know that February 28th or the last day of February was already a delayed date, and within 1 month the budget had to be passed because the fiscal year starts from 1st April, and if the budget is not passed, then a vote on account has to be passed. So the government argued that disruption in the budget would hamper the implementation from 1st April, and there would be delayed funding to the ministries. So this was a constitutional lacuna. The question is, does Election Commission of India have authority to stop or delay these budgetary procedures. Yes, they have this model code of conduct. Now, you do understand, model code of conduct itself does not have any statutory backing. It is a convention based, or I would rather say consensus based understanding between different political parties, and ECI implements that. But this exposed a constitutional lacuna. Does ECI have the authority? Even today, we do not know. In 2017, the Election Commission of India tried to clarify this from the NDA government, that what was the cabinet decision at that particular time. And it was, from the newspaper reportings that we understand, it was just a one-time delay. It was a one-time accommodation of delayed budget, and it should not become a precedent. Now, if the tables are turned, if today's NDA government is requested to change the date of the budget because of certain state assembly election, would they do it? That is the question. All right. So this constitutional lacuna, it still stands. This was a one-time accommodation where the budget presentation was delayed by 16 days. And after the elections and after the election results, the budget was presented. That was the formal reason. But budget 2012 also has a lot of significance because its repercussions or its impacts are felt even till today. Do you know why? Because of the situation or the economic situation at that particular time. Let's look at the economy in 2011 to 2012. What economic strategy would the government follow? At that particular time, there were a lot of issues. You do know that a few years back in 2008, there was subprime crisis in the United States of America, which had impacted the entire world. In 2011, there was Eurozone crisis because of the debt default by Greece and other countries. It had impacted the global economy because we are living in a globalized world. And because of all these developments, the GDP growth in India was predicted to be slowed down. From 8.4%, it was predicted to be 6.9%, and eventually it ended up somewhere in mid 5% that particular year. The crude oil prices rose suddenly. The crude oil prices per barrel, they rose to 115 rupees as predicted in the budget estimates in the previous budget at about 90. Now, which led to double-digit inflation already. Apart from that, the fiscal deficit had reached alarming levels. The fiscal deficit had reached 5.9% of the GDP, which had already breached the mandated number by the FRBMA, that is Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. That prescribed 3.5% of fiscal deficit. That number was already breached. Apart from that, the tax revenue shortfall was seen from the estimates about 32,000 crore rupees. I'll tell you one of the biggest reasons for this as well. The tax revenue. Now, if you see, the government estimates the tax revenue, and if you are short by 32,000 crore, you do understand that that is a huge shortfall. Your estimates have gone awry, right? There was also subsidy burden from petroleum, food and fertilizer, which had reached 2.5% of GDP. It had reached unsustainable level. So there were a lot of challenges in front of the government at that time. And the question was, what was a strategy that they would follow in the budget? And the strategy that they adopted in 2012, questionable at times. Some of them good decisions, some of them had huge repercussions. Let's try to understand what the government did. Now, here comes the point where policy intent and policy communication are extremely important. What the government did, let's try to understand, because the revenues are already down. There is case of inflation, GDP growth slowing down. So what the government did, we all know that the government needs to increase its tax revenue. Okay, they were already going for disinvestment, etc., but they wanted more revenue. So what did they do? They had to increase taxes, but they could not increase direct taxes. In fact, the steps that they took was income tax exemption limit was raised from 1.8 to 2 lakh. That means an exemption was given for individual taxpayers. So if you understand, this is a reform that has come in the direct taxes. I want you to understand this clearly, that this is a direct tax reform where the tax revenue is not increasing, rather they're giving exemptions. So they need to increase taxes. How? They increase the taxes in the indirect domain. And we all know that indirect tax burden, it falls on everybody. That's not very progressive, because indirect tax is paid by the richest of the richest people and the poorest of the poor people also. Like the excise duty was raised from 10% to 12%. Service tax was raised from 10% to 12%. It had its own issues. I can say that this was the beginning of the criticism of increase in indirect taxes, and need for rationalization of indirect taxes, which eventually culminated in GST in 2017. What other thing did the government do? The government, in the budget speech itself, at that time, finance minister, he announced the GAAR, General Anti-Avoidance Rule, a very interesting concept. Okay. Now, the policy communication here shows that we won't tolerate tax avoidance. A very general idea for any kind of foreign company to invest in India would be they try to avoid the tax liability. They go for tax avoidance. One of the ideas would be to simply buy a subsidiary to another country. Say, for example, I'll just explain what is this GAAR, the General Anti-Avoidance Rule. It is a legal provision that empowered Indian tax authorities to examine the transaction that appeared to avoid taxes, and they could impose tax and penalty in a retrospective way also. So let me explain what exactly happens. See, simply put, if a foreign investor acquires Indian company via an intermediary, say in Mauritius or some other country which has a easy tax treaty with India, and specifically to claim tax benefit, and they could do it because at that time this was a loophole in Indian tax system, and many people did enjoy it. And one of the cases which had huge bearing from this GAAR was the Vodafone case. Now you all know Vodafone, a UK company, they bought Hutchison. You all know the Hutch Telecom. I think we were in school at that time, and the advertisement of Hutch was quite interesting. There was a black pug which used to follow, and they used to say that Hutch network follows you everywhere. Okay, so UK Vodafone, it acquired Hutchison in 2007 for $11 billion deal. How? Through another subsidiary which was in the Cayman Islands. So the Vodafone UK did not directly acquire, but it acquired through a subsidiary which was in the Cayman Islands, and they avoided tax. So Indian tax authorities, they imposed a tax penalty of 11,000 crore on Vodafone UK. So the case went to Supreme Court, and in 2011, Supreme Court sided with Vodafone UK. Now this was a blot on the government's face, and to avoid such things, the government announced GAAR in the budget itself. And at that particular time, as soon as GAAR was announced, the markets fell. Okay, the share markets tumbled, and the share markets were in red at that time. There was a lot of commentary about this is some sort of a retaliation by the government for the Vodafone verdict. They want to nullify the Vodafone verdict, and later on, the tax authorities sent a notice to Vodafone UK for paying tax worth 18,000 crore rupees. Later on, we all know about the Cairn India case, different cases under the GAAR. Okay, so this thing happened because of the GAAR. The income tax commissioner could use GAAR provisions even for a tax benefit country and levy full taxes and the penalties as well. The intent here is to avoid, is basically to stop the tax avoidance, but communication was not there. What happened was, because of this particular decisions, over the next few months, the FIIs, they started to take out money from Indian equities. So April, May and June, continuous outflow of funds took place from the Indian equity markets. Eventually, the government had to revert back this decision. In June 2012, the government silently put a stay on GAAR, and they installed, or they brought, a committee led by Parthasarathi Shom to study the impacts of GAAR. How it has left scars even till today, because in 2017, GAAR was turned by the NDA government as a prospective tax, not a retrospective tax. That means today, more or less, I would say GAAR is like defund, because it's a prospective tax. That means no other country is going to take benefit like this, because they know that there will be tax liability now. The retrospectiveness and the general anti-avoidance rule itself, it had huge repercussions on Indian economy, even felt till today, because it questioned the, or the foreign investors started to question the policy certainty in India, and they lost confidence, and it had repercussions for at least 3 to 4 years, where the foreign investment in India was continuously on the lower side. Later on in 2014, 2015, after the NDA first government came up, pro business policies were brought, which has again increased the amount of foreign investments in India. Okay. Now, apart from that, what the government did, it was a good point because they understood that the subsidy burden was continuously increasing and this was unsustainable. Okay. So the continuous rise in the subsidy burden was like a fiscal cancer, and they had to introduce certain things so that there is no siphoning of the funds or siphoning of the subsidy, because there were a lot of leakages. So they started the Aadhaar experiment, and which has yielded result today. Initially, mobile-based fertilizer management system was started. Later on, it has become direct subsidy or direct subsidy benefit to the farmers itself. Pilot projects were started in Mysuru for market price LPG with reimbursement. Today, we have the Pahal scheme, although the subsidy amount has dwindled continuously till today. Aadhaar-enabled payments in 50 districts started. Today, we have this on a more larger scale throughout the country. Okay, so this policy initiative, it has yielded a lot of positive results and has given a direction to the future governments as well. Overall, what the budget 2012-2013 teaches us, it's a textbook case of Indian political system. As I told you, any Indian government is always in between a rock and a hard place, and they have to take tough decisions, but those tough decisions have to be communicated properly. It teaches us certain things which are of extreme importance to our Indian political system, Indian economical system. First is that institutions matter. The Election Commission of India matters. Even today, there is this constitutional lacuna that if there are multiple states where the election is going on, should we delay the central budget? It's still a question mark from the legal standpoint. Does Election Commission of India have powers to do it? That is also a question mark today. Should there be clarity? Perhaps yes. Should there be empowerment of ECI? Yes. Clarity is needed. Apart from that, the budget 2012-2013 has taught us that for investors, perception matters a lot. Policy intent is very fine, because I would say every government has good intention to bring good policies, ultimately leading to betterment of public. We hope at least. And the policy communication is extremely important as well. Apart from that, growth requires confidence. It's not just about taxes. It's not just about direct taxes, tax schemes, indirect taxation. It's not just about money. Fiscal consolidation along with economic stability, both are needed. Without both, there would be economic chaos, right? Apart from that, economic reforms, they need consensus. Without consensus, if the governments take unilateral decisions, they tend to roll back. And it's not just the UPA government. Later on, the NDA government have also gone for different rollback of decisions that were taken in the budget, like taxation on the pension funds, etc. Such steps have been rolled back. But what this budget teaches us is that reforms, big time reforms, they need consensus. Unilateral action always leads to backlash, always leads to triggers, and many times even public protests. So that's why I told you the effects of budget 2012-2013 can be even felt today in a positive way also and in negative way also. It's a learning lesson for us, and that is why we say that governance in India is very, very tough. We are a country of 140 people, and budgeting is a complex process. And in general, Indian governance, I can sum it up that Indian governance, not just budgeting, but any decision making, it is actually a microcosm of ambitious goals. Every government that comes up, it comes up with ambitious goals. They want to take decisions, but there are always political constraints and they need to do course correction. So it's a continuous learning lesson for any government. And budget 2012-2013, it is a testimony of that. It is a lesson in our political history, in our economic history, that budgeting with policy intent and policy communication and long-term goals is extremely important. I hope that you have found out the story of budget 2012-13 to be intriguing one, and I'll see you in the next episode of Political Fault Lines. If you have any queries, any doubts, if you want to connect with me, you can always follow me on my social media handle @Rahul Sai222. You can directly message me on Instagram. There is a number also 8841222262 where you can directly text me. Apart from that, this is the Telegram channel dedicatedly for UPSC aspirants, Rahul Sai222_UPSC. You can check it out and join if you want. Thank you very much for watching this video. Jai Hind.